Hello, I'm in Central Park. I've got a 2 hour queue while I'm waiting for Shakespeare in the Park. It's a free thing they do every night. It's going to be Julius Caesar tonight. It's done for free. So I got nothing to do for a couple of hours, and I thought, what better place to talk about the succession crisis of 1066. Absolutely not just showing off because I'm here. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So, first thing to think about when we think about the succession crisis, and the question that always comes up, is to what extent is it Edward's fault? And it's almost impossible not to come to the conclusion that Edward is largely culpable for this in many ways. Sorry, it's very noisy down that way. I'm going to come this way. He isn't clear about who is going to succeed him. I mean, I often think that all he needs to do at any point during this whole period is he just needs to send out a writ. He needs to stand on the steps of Westminster Abbey and announce, Edgar Atheling is going to be my successor, or Harold Godwinson is going to be my successor, William of Normandy is going to be my successor. He doesn't do this. He never does this. So we have to think about Edward's culpability here, really. But we need to weigh up against a number of other factors. Probably, I mean, the obvious clear thing to talk about, you'd always need to talk about first, is he doesn't have a son and heir. Why he doesn't have one is problematic. We don't know, do we? We don't know. And it would be wrong in an essay answer to say he didn't have children because he hated the Godwin family, or he didn't have children because he was unable to conceive, or because he was pious. We just don't know. But now it'd be a good time to use that sort of language of uncertainty, perhaps. It could be argued that, it's possible that, and then this is a much stronger way to do this. So yeah, no clear successor. Remember, this wonderful word primogeniture isn't in place yet in Saxon England, so even had Edward had a son, it's not a foregone conclusion that his son would be the one who's going to follow him. But the Witan is going to choose the successor, and it's likely that would have made life a lot easier. Okay, so he doesn't have a successor. Second thing to think about is the ambitions of these other men, notably Harold Godwinson and William of Normandy. So Harold's claim is, of course, very strong. His claim is based on Edward offering him the throne on his deathbed. And this is interesting that even the Norman sources agree on this. For the Normans, this makes it even worse that Harold is doing this, because, of course, they're setting Harold up here as a perjurer. Harold, according to the Norman sources, has sworn to support William of Normandy's claim by accepting this deathbed grant from Edward. He's really breaking all of the rules, all of the rules of oath-taking, which, of course, are so important to the Normans. But Harold is the brother-in-law of the king. He's been acting as sub-regulus, as junior king, for the final years of Edward's reign. He's supported by the Witan. He's the most powerful Saxon, so he's got a strong claim. So this is important when we're looking at why is there a succession crisis. Harold has a very strong claim, but it's not absolute. It's not an absolute claim. William also has a strong claim, not just because, according to William, both Harold and Edward have offered him the throne, but he's also related by blood, of course. Remember, he's the cousin of Edward, very closely related to Emma, Edward's mother. So William also has a strong claim. Interesting, and I spoke about this last time. If we think about the position of Edward the Exile and Edgar Atheling, then this is interesting, isn't it? Because certainly, if Edgar had been a little older, it seems natural that the Witan would have supported him. If Edward Exile had survived, then he almost certainly would have been the natural successor to Edward the Confessor. Again, to what extent is Edward to blame for the disputed succession crisis? Why didn't he just say, look, Harold Godwinson is going to act as regent until Edgar becomes old enough? It's frustrating, isn't it? Could have saved an awful lot of bother, really. But how unwell is Edward at this point? We're not really sure. I mean, was he terribly unwell? Was he up to this? It's problematic, but we have to, I think, lay some culpability at Edward's feet. So we've got Edward's mistakes, Edward not having a natural successor, these powerful, ambitious men, William and Harold. Then we need to throw into the mix, of course, Harold Hardrada. His claim is based on his, or rather on his connection with Canute's legacy. Canute, of course, had been King of England, Canutes, Harold Harefoot, Hardicanute, these are all Viking kings. So Hardrada's claim has got some basis there, and of course this is added to by the fact that Magnus of Norway and Hardicanute have this agreement that whoever dies first, the other is going to succeed to his possessions. And of course Edward takes England, Edward the Confessor takes England, Hardicanute takes Denmark, and Magnus is left in Norway. And this is what leads to Magnus' attempted invasion in 1042 that doesn't occur because Magnus dies. So Tostig, after he's been exiled, goes to Harald Hardrada, and he convinces Hardrada that this is the right thing to do, that he has this right to the throne, to claim to it. So we've got 4 genuine contenders here for the throne in William of Normandy, Harold Godwinson, Edgar the Atheling, and Harold Hardrada. They've all got a claim. England is a very attractive prospect. It's very well governed, as we looked at last time. It's testament, perhaps, to the success of Edward's government that all of these men want to come and want to conquer England, because it's just there, it's there for the taking. So it's interesting that perhaps it's the very success of Saxon England that is going to lead to its downfall. So there's more to it, isn't there, than just simply saying it was Edward's fault, he should have had a son. So it's important to look over this again. Looking at past paper questions, it's almost always either assess the reasons for the succession crisis or some version of to what extent was Edward the Confessor to blame for the disputed succession in 1066. And it's a fairly straightforward answer, that, isn't it? You're just going to weigh up the different factors, come up with what you think is the most reasonable argument. I'd say the easiest way is to talk about Edward could have done and perhaps should have done more. That's probably the easiest way to do it. The only other question I can remember that was a little bit off, I think, really, was assess the strength of William of Normandy's claim to succeed to the throne in 1066. So if we're going to assess the strength of William's claim, then we need to assess it against something else. So we have to assess it against Harold Godwinson's claim, presumably against Harold Hardrada, Edgar Atheling's claim. The problem with that question, though, is if we're really going to assess the strength of William's claim, then it really comes down to an assessment of evidence, which under the assessment objective, under AO1, that's not something you should have to do. So I think this was a bit of a poor question. So hopefully we won't see OCR, hopefully we won't see anything like that again. But bear in mind, something like that could come along. And if you know your stuff, that's not a difficult question. So basics, Edward doesn't have an heir, isn't clear about the succession, England's an attractive place, William and Harold, ambitious men, Hardrada's claim is based on Magnus of Norway, Hardicanute's deal, and his connections with Canutes and the Vikings. So I think it's okay, isn't it, that, really? Anyway, look at Central Park. Become a history teacher. All your wildest dreams will come true. Bye-bye.